math question.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. Dietitian Ashley Koff here, CEO of the Better Nutrition Program. I was just telling our guests that, I'm on a small mission here with the Better Nutrition Program. I want to change the dietary guidelines, have better tools. If my plate works for someone, great, but it's not working for most people. So how do we do that? And one of the ways that we do that is we actually turn to the experts who do two things. Experts are people who review research and evaluate research, but then they're also the people who apply research in practice. And so the reason that we at the Better Nutrition Program go to experts, bring experts to you in interviews like this and go to them to develop our tools is that we want you to have the knowledge of people who have been humanizing, have been customizing, have been helping people actually get the results. And we know that those results don't come from things that are one size fits all. So that's a bigger introduction than I usually offer, but it was apropos of our pre-interview questions. So just a reminder, if you're watching us live, awesome. We are so excited to have you. You can answer your questions, or you can get your questions answered live here. Tell us where you're joining us from. Share those questions. If you're watching us on YouTube and you love it, first of all, please give us a thumbs up. That's always helpful. But also, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook and you're watching at a later point, go ahead and ask your questions. We'll get notifications. I'll make sure that our guest gets those questions, and we'll get her expert advice and recommendations for you. Now, speaking of expert advice, I am here to interview my colleague. As dietitians, we are experts. We are evidence-based. We're reviewing the research. We practice, but we do not provide specific information for an individual in this forum because we need to know a lot more about you. So these are general recommendations and tools that are going to help you actually find what you need to do personally, but that means connecting specifically with Beth. That's why I have her website here, or with the information or her course, which we're also sharing the link to in our notes. So without further ado, welcome, Beth. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'd love to start off with, you got a lot of letters after your name. It's Beth Rosen, MSRD, CDN. So if you can take us through sort of your path to becoming a dietitian and focusing in on this area of digestive health.
Sure, and thank you for having me. So the letters after my name start with MS, which is my Master of Science that I got at Columbia University back in the 90s, so I'm dating myself, in nutrition education, because after I finished my degree in dietetics and started my dietetic internship, I really wanted to be able to go out and share the research with people, with lay people, at a level that they could understand and implement. So I got my degree in nutrition education, which was very helpful. The RD is registered dietitian, which of course, as you know, you get after having a bachelor's degree at least, and 1,000 hours internship, and a 4-hour exam, and then 75 credits, continuing ed credits every 5 years. So we know our stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the RD. And the CDN is Certified Dietitian Nutritionist. So that's my state license in Connecticut.
Great. So digestive health, and Beth and I actually didn't talk about this ahead of time, but we have a very similar background, or I should say belly stuff, that led us to being really interested in this part. And, for me, it was career defining. It sounds like, it was for you as well. And so, it's so interesting today to sort of look at this space of so many women and men, and now kids, just don't know what it means to actually have a belly that feels good, right? So talk a little bit for a second about, we're going to dive into a number of different topic and use specific words. And so where I like to start off before we tell you what you want to do for your belly and how to evaluate and help our bellies get good, which we are going to get into those tips, I want to make sure that we all understand like all the words around our bellies, right? So we are going to use words. We're going to talk about FODMAP. We're going to mention SIBO or SIBO, SIBO. We also will probably talk about probiotics, prebiotics. So Beth, if you could start off with actually just defining those so that we make sure that everybody in the conversation is on the same page with what we're talking about.
Okay, so where should I start? Which is the first word that
Let's go with FODMAP because it was in the title. Yeah.
Okay, so FODMAP stands for fermentable oligo. dimonosaccharides and polyols. It's a
Yes.
lot of mouthful
Mhm.
of carbohydrates, but what it really means is these are fermentable carbohydrates, sugars and fibers that when they go into the gut, they either draw water in, or the microbes that are in the gut will feed off them, produce gas, and give us gas.
Mm-hmm.
For people with irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, we tend to feel the pressure of the drawing of the water in and the gas much more sensitively than people who don't have IBS. So for people with IBS, a low FODMAP diet, a diet that's low in foods that have fermentable carbohydrates in it, will reduce the amount of water being drawn into the gut and the amount of gas being produced by the microbes.
And so some people, we have the word, so let's start because you used the word IBS and or the initials, the acronym IBS. So let's go in there.
First.
Yeah, exactly. So let's define that one. I love Nutrition Lexicon. It's a great place to start. So let's talk about IBS. Yeah.
So irritable bowel syndrome is a syndrome that is represented by a change in bowel habits. So it could be in the frequency of the bowel habits, the pain associated with bowel habits, and also how long you might have had this change in a bowel habit. And the thing about IBS or irritable bowel syndrome that's important to note is that there's nothing structurally wrong with your digestive tract. It is functionally not working right. So your brain and your gut, that brain-gut interaction is not firing correctly, which can send mixed signals. So it can be something like, I'm going to use another one of these words, visceral hypersensitivity, where so for people who have IBS with predominant diarrhea, they might have a gut that fires real quick, even when nothing's really in there, so they're going all the time. And then there's people who could have IBS with predominant constipation, where their brain is saying, okay, we're full up, fire, and it's just not emptying. So it can go either way.
Great. And I'm going to remind people, Beth has this actual great free assessment tool. So why don't you, while you're listening, if you're interested, just type the word digest into the comments, and we'll make sure that you get that free guide so that we can get you signed up and you can get that and be able to use that as far as this assessment, because we're going to talk about a lot of things, and I want to make sure that you get something concrete that you can look at. Okay. So following up on that, we talked about IBS, we've talked about FODMAP. Now there's this other area in terms of SIBO, and SIBO, SIBO, that can be in conjunction with IBS. It might be different than IBS. So let's go through and explain that one.
Okay, so I call it SIBO.
Okay.
SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And the difference between SIBO and IBS is that IBS occurs in the large intestines, where SIBO is occurring in the small intestine. And the difference there is that in the large intestine, we have microbes that live there. And we're finding out from science there's a lot of microbes that live in our gut, in our large intestine. But what we also know is that they shouldn't be living in our small intestine. So when bacteria or microbes end up in the small intestine, they will do some of the same things that the bacteria or microbes do in the large intestine, meaning they draw water in, they ferment our food, and it causes upper abdominal pain, bloating, but also can cause the gas. The interesting thing about SIBO is that we're finding that it may not be a syndrome on its own. It might be secondary to something else. So it can be secondary, certainly, to IBS with constipation, because when our gut slows down and we might have a lot of, stuff in there backed up, it can lead to bacteria sitting where it shouldn't be sitting. That's one way it can happen. Or it can be from the muscles in our small intestines, what's called the migrating motor complex. It's almost like the sweeper, the cleaner outer at the end of a meal, that it propels everything out of the small intestine into the large intestine. And sometimes those muscles aren't working correctly. So food will just hang out in there, and then the microbes will ferment them in there.
Wow. And you mentioned something as we were diving into these definitions about how the brain and the gut. So let's talk for a second about that brain and gut connection and why you were talking about how the signals may not be happening. So where are the signals for your digestive system coming from, and what is that connection that you were talking about?
Okay, so we have the brain, which we know sends signals through neurons all over the body, right? Neural pathways all over the body. We have hormones that get released when we're hungry and hormones get released when we're full. Those kinds of things happen naturally. We know that that happens. In our gut, we're finding out that these microbes that are in there aren't just in there just to hang out, but they're also part of the communication pathway. They help with our immunity. They play a lot of different roles that we're finding out about. And when the gut and the brain are not communicating correctly, that's when misfiring can happen with muscles. That's when inflammation can happen from all the stuff I mentioned before going on in there, the bloat, the distension, the gas, all that can cause some inflammation in the gut. So when that's not connected right, when that communication isn't clear, that's when we run into some of these symptoms that people with irritable bowel syndrome suffer from.
Great. And so one final area, you were talking about visceral, but I also want to talk about the mucosal layer because we are going to talk a little bit about absorption as one of the factors in dealing with, healthy digestion. And so, I remember back in the day, so I became a dietitian 20 years ago. I was definitely dealing with my own digestive issues before that. But when I started talking to doctors and practitioners about leaky gut and the mucosal layer of the digestive tract, or even, where we figured out with, gluten intolerance and what that does, from an absorption standpoint, it was like, what's she talking about? Like, there's no leaks in your gut can't leak. But now we know that that's actually a factor as well. So talk a little bit about the mucosal layer and just kind of what this means for having healthy digestion.
Okay, so when you have chronic inflammation in the large intestine, what might happen is that the cells, I'm going to use my fingers now, that are normally really close together because of the expansion from the inflammation can separate a little bit, causing intestinal permeability. So what can happen there is that bacteria or microbes are said to leak out and may cause issues in other parts of the body. For one would be interstitial cystitis, which is when the bladder muscles fire incorrectly. Mm-hmm. So there's some of that signaling that gets messed up in the bladder. But with that chronic inflammation, there can be malabsorption because the villi that are in these little villi that are in the large intestine may be swollen, so there's not as much surface area for absorption.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is different than if somebody had celiac disease, which if somebody has celiac disease and they have gluten, I'm using my fingers again, mm-hmm. the villi get tamped down, and then malabsorption definitely happens because there is no surface area left. Where people who don't have celiac disease, theirs can be compromised, but certainly not damaged in the way that you would see in somebody with celiac disease.
Yeah. So everyone right now, we just take a collective exhale. We're like, wow, we just got so much knowledge bomb dropped on us. And this is also why Beth has created a course. Like, so if you want to go from point A to point B, meaning point A where my digestion isn't maybe feeling great to point B where it's feeling better, that is where working with an expert, because one of the key things is that your digestion is personal, right? So everything that we're talking about here, as we keep using the phrase, I love that you keep saying we're learning. We're always learning about our digestive system. And the thing that we are consistently learning more about is how genetic it is, and how our environment is half or at least 40% of it, but also the genetics is popping in. So what we are talking about right now is FODMAP, and really how these particular carbohydrates, how customizing a plan around your eating that either limits them entirely or looks at different quantities, and that's what we're going to dive into, can actually help your digestive system run better. So I thought we'd break the conversation up into two areas today, Beth. One is what we should be avoiding, and the other is what we should be including, because I think one of the concerns that I have, I don't know if you share this concern, is people are doing a lot of avoiding foods and nutrients and things like that, and as a result, they may actually not be giving either the digestive system or the rest of their body what it needs to run better. So I think what we want, the win to me, is how do we take your information and teach people how to make better choices that actually helps nourish their body rather than just excluding things. So that's the thought process for how I'm taking this interview. So
Okay.
Let's start with then on that front. When we talk about FODMAP and the decision to avoid it, is it avoiding it in entirety? So walk us through how you take somebody from the conversation of, okay, you might be somebody where you're more sensitive to FODMAPs. Here's what we're thinking you should do.
Okay, so first, with every client I see, I start with an assessment to see if they have disordered eating tendencies or eating disorders, because in that case, I will not recommend the low FODMAP diet. They've already experienced lots of restriction, and as we know, excessive restriction, whether it's through chronic dieting, yo-yo dieting, intermittent fasting, can really wreak havoc on the gut when we're not using it regularly. And by regularly, I mean every 3 to 4 hours, so that the gut gets used to getting nutrients in and having to use the peristalsis muscle. So first I assess for that. If I've got the all clear, then I will move on to sharing the ins and outs of the low FODMAP diet with them, first being the elimination phase of the low FODMAP diet, which is a 2 to 6 week period. And the research shows that we shouldn't go beyond 6 weeks because 2 reasons. One is because it can cause some nutrient deficiencies. And like you said, we're trying to avoid that. And the second reason is because we want to make sure that we're liberalizing the diet as much as possible, not causing any restriction, not causing more food fear or food confusion. A lot of the clients I see who have irritable bowel syndrome, SIBO, or any other gut health issues typically come to me with some either food fear or food confusion, where they might have an episode of some sort of flare and blame it on the food they ate that moment, when really what might have caused it, if it was food related, happened from a meal that was an hour to 7 hours ago, because it didn't just go from the mouth to the large intestine and get fermented in the matter of 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So,
I think that's so important. So first of all, I would say like the majority of us have food confusion just in general. But, I think one of the key things that you're talking about that's so valuable is also just about documenting, right? So tracking so that when they walk in the door to you, I think we can all recall maybe what we had to eat this morning, but definitely not 7 hours ago. So I think that's smart. Right. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So, and I do that with my clients too. I start with a 24-hour recall, trying to get them to remember everything they ate the day before and see if I can locate any high FODMAP foods that are currently in their diet, so that when we are going through the elimination phase, I can tell them specifically what they might want to substitute, ask them what other fruits, vegetables, grains, whatever it might be, food that they like, and see if we can substitute it in that meal that they're eating. I find that a lot of people with digestive disorders tend to eat habitually, meaning that they might have the same breakfast and same lunch every day if they find that those feel safe to them. And that's fine, as long as we can change out some of those higher FODMAP foods for low FODMAP foods. So that's sort of where I start.
Where you start. And are there situations, so I'm not going to say are there. So the number one situation that we always hear when we go to, it's a doctor, we hear it on TV, and it's like, to me, it's so annoying. So I'm just going to point that one out. I'm already giving my total bias, is like, well, stress could be a factor. So yes, we know stress could be a factor. I want to talk about more specifically, are there situations, whether it's travel, whether, anything going on, that are more likely to shift how your body responds to some of those foods as well? Have you identified those?
I would say 2 come to my mind. One is if you travel by air. So if you're traveling by air and you have irritable bowel syndrome, yes, the plane is pressurized, but it's not pressurized to sea level. It's pressurized to 10,000 feet. So your gut is still filling with pressurized air, which could make you feel uncomfortable. A lot of people have what's called traveler's constipation, where there's this fear of moving your bowels in a strange place. And so you tend to hold it in. And the more you hold it in, the more your body draws the water out of your gut. And then you're left with this rock hard movement sitting there, not being moved. So that happens. And the other piece is when you travel, you might have your circadian rhythm thrown off. For instance, if you travel to a different time zone, now you're sleeping at different times, that can also throw off your gut health.
So we just got I think in talking about that, we just got a request of like, so then what should you do? So in terms of, I'm going to add on to the question then. So what would be good food or beverage choices when you travel, noting that might happen? And we're talking specifically about traveling by air, as you were just mentioning.
Yeah. So I don't know that there's a way to avoid that pressurized belly when you have IBS, but I would say that if you are traveling by air, to pack your own low FODMAP snacks and make sure you're drinking plenty of fluids. That way you won't trigger some sort of flare on the plane in addition to the air pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So, having snack bars with you, nuts with you, bringing little packets of oatmeal, clementines with you, those are easy to travel with. Having, a mix of snacks that you can have that are low FODMAP. And there's a number of low FODMAP brands on the market.
Mm-hmm.
Some are in supermarkets, some are online. So there's plenty of food to be found if you know where to look for it.
Great. So now we want to kind of get into the meat or the not meat, the vegetable, the carbohydrate of the FODMAPs, because I think there's a lot of confusion. Before we did this interview, somebody sent me a question asking us specifically to talk about sweeteners. So I just want to make sure that we include that one in there. So let's really go through, because unfortunately, when you look at the list of FODMAP, it can look overwhelming in terms of a lot of foods being on there and a lot of healthy foods. So let's start first with is it an everybody needs to exclude everything, or how do you figure out how you can eat healthfully but low FODMAP?
So I want to go back to that seeing the list comment that you made. And this is an interesting thing because the Monash University, which is the school in Australia that houses the research for the low FODMAP diet, they've been doing it for over 10 years. They're the ones who are doing all the research on a daily basis, and they've created an app that's good on Android and on iPhones that you can use, and that's the most up-to-date gold standard list of food products and foods and ingredients to see what's considered low FODMAP. And the great thing about their app, they recently updated it, is that it's in a traffic light system, so it's red, green, yellow. But even if a food has a red next to it, if you look under the name of the food, if it has any green or yellow, you can click on it and see what portion size might still be okay to eat. So for example, a green apple, a Granny Smith apple, has a red next to it. Mm-hmm. But if you were to click on it, you can see that you can have a very small portion. I want to say something like 1/6 of an apple, which sounds funny, but if you were to have a sandwich and there was a slice of apple in there, or if you have a salad and there's a little crumble of apple on there, you don't have to say, no, I can't have this. You can still have it. So the great thing about that app is it really helps you to liberalize your diet. And I will say that I can speak for myself as a dietitian that when that app changes, I update my PDF handout. But there are people that place these lists online. There are doctors that have handouts from 2012. People have come to me with really old handouts, and those are not updated. So I would check your source for where you're getting your information. If it doesn't have a current date on it, and I'm saying current like 2019 because already things have changed in 2019 and it's only April. So check those dates on there. And if all else fails, head over to Monash University's app and check it out. It's not free, but it's worth it. And
you were mentioning, you just said you update your PDFs. Are these things that if people want to come to your website that they can access there? Is that through your course, or is it through, when you're talking about the things that you provide?
The things I provide, I do provide to my private clients in my private practice when I see them. And I also provide it in my online course, which is called How to Get Your Gut in Sync. And in there also, I provide it there. I don't like to give the list away because I don't want people printing it out and then having that as their list, because if I'm working with somebody one-on-one, I'll let them know if something's been updated. I update my clients. And if somebody has purchased my course and they're enrolled, I've let them know that I update the materials often. So it's a lifetime access. So if something changes, I'm going to change it, and they can always go back and see the updates.
So once again, people, that's why these are the Better Nutrition Expert interviews. So I just want to make sure we have that clarity. Another question, when you were talking about the red and you said there might be an amount of the apple, what about the form of the apple? So what if juices are very popular today and green apple might be in a juice. Is juicing easier, or is cooking the apple? Like when you do something to that food, does it change it, or is it just the focus that it's a FODMAP food, so in any way that or form that you would consume it, it's going to be an issue for you?
In some cases, yes, the form will change. So for instance, soy, right? So in soy milk in its liquid form, it's never been fermented. Soy milk in many cases is considered high FODMAP. There is a form that was new to the app. So like I think this week, added new to the app. So like the UHT, the the boxed soy milk, but specifically it has to be made with soy protein. But soy milk is high FODMAP, whereas firm tofu is not. Now, they come from the same bean, but firm tofu is already fermented, so there's nothing left for the microbes to ferment, whereas the milk hasn't been fermented yet, and that gives the microbes, it's like birthday cake to them. They go crazy.
Yeah.
So there are forms with the example of juice. Yes, when you remove the fiber, you concentrate the carbohydrate when you squeeze juice. So yes, it's going to be higher. And considering that apples are high FODMAP already, and so are pears, so foods that are sweetened with apple juice or pear juice, you'd want to be careful with. The one juice that's considered low FODMAP is cranberry juice. But again, cranberry juice can be made in the store with high fructose corn syrup, and high fructose corn syrup is high FODMAP. So it would have to be cranberry juice, not cranberry juice cocktail.
Yeah. So that's an argument already for better quality nutrition being like better quality nutrition. So we're going to get into the what do you need to give your body once we go through more of the FODMAP part. So one of the things from a FODMAP thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is then eating out and the whole notion of, somebody remember asked me the question about sweeteners. So I was just going to expand on it in terms of sweeteners, sauces, spices. How do you navigate what's FODMAP and what could be acceptable both at home and then when you're grabbing something out?
Yeah, so that's something that you really have to know the list in order to know the difference. So for example, sweeteners that are safe, sugar, real sugar, table sugar, that's a safe low FODMAP food. Real maple syrup is a low FODMAP sweetener. You can use stevia. I'm trying to think what else. And a teaspoon of honey. Depending on the honey, you can use a teaspoon of honey. High FODMAP sweeteners include high fructose corn syrup. So I know you know the science, but just for our friends at home,
please, yeah.
So when fructose is digested and used in the body, it needs to be in a 1-to-1 ratio with glucose. So glucose and fructose sort of go through digestion together. But when there's a higher amount of fructose, in the case of high fructose or excess fructose, there won't be a buddy for that fructose. So that will pass through and not go into the bloodstream and pass through the small intestine into the large intestine. And because it's such a big molecule, it will pull water in, and that will cause us to feel bloated. So high fructose corn syrup is a high FODMAP sweetener. Other high FODMAP sweeteners include agave. So it's not always what we considered quote unquote healthy foods that are low FODMAP, because agave was very popular for a while as a natural sweetener. And also you want to watch out for sugar alcohols like sorbitol, mannitol, and xylitol. Those three can be found in candies, gum, mint, things like that. So you'd want to look out for those as well. Those would be high FODMAP sweeteners.
Yeah, and I actually, interestingly, just recently had a patient who was having both gummy supplements and a protein powder, both of which we figured out, as you said, like you start to do the evaluation, in the name of trying to do something much better for them, these and the combination of them were what was really causing that problem. So I think it's so smart to make sure that you're looking for these ingredients and sort of figuring it out on that piece. That's great.
Two other tricky ingredients that are used as sweeteners, but also to increase the fiber in a product, are inulin and chicory root extract. And those you will find a lot in protein powders, in granola bars. I don't want to call out certain brands, but brands that you consider to be really quote unquote healthy have these things in them. So when we talk about something being healthy, you have to consider your individual needs. So for me, because I do follow a low FODMAP diet, and I know that inulin is one of my triggers, those bars that are considered healthy are not healthy for me. Same with cauliflower pizza crust.
Yes.
That would send me over the edge. And I get it that people think that cauliflower is healthy, but you also have to consider whose body is ingesting it. So for me, cauliflower is unhealthy. Table sugar is healthy. So it speaks to the person.
Yeah. And I remember I had but I had this amazing grilled side of sunchokes, and I've never been so sick in my life. So I think as, these prebiotic foods become more popular, you're exactly right. It's really important. So Lisa, I think Lisa's trying to blame her mom. No, I'm just teasing you, Lisa. But Lisa said she's a sugar addict since she was born. She said her mom was addicted to sugar, and so she put sugar in her water bottle, and she's actually asking, did that affect her gut? And, is this part of my struggle? So I think, if you want to take that one, I think it's a little bit more of a personal piece, but I do think one of the things that she's talking about, and of course we all, I love to blame my mom for giving me too many antibiotics. It's much easier to blame someone else, right?
Oh, sure.
Right, exactly. But so,
mom.
yeah. And I think, but the bottle and just the notion of liquid sugar, going in, I think is a really great one to talk about, and just kind of how that could affect the gut. Because a lot of times, as you mentioned, it might not be what happened to somebody, what they just ate or even 7 hours ago, but it could be what happened back when you were younger. So how do you sort of start to unpack what your history could do for where your gut is today?
So I want to say that we don't know for sure what causes IBS. So I'm letting your mom off the hook, and saying that it's not her fault and it's not your fault. In a lot of cases, IBS could be triggered from gastroenteritis or food poisoning or traveler's diarrhea. I'm talking a lot about poop, but those things can trigger IBS in a form called post-infectious IBS. So it could have come from that. It may be genetic. I see a lot of clients when they tell me they have IBS and they put their family history down, so does the rest of their family. So those pieces might play a bigger role than what you were fed as a child.
Mom off the hook, but good information to know. And I think one of the challenges, if you're somebody who's adopted or don't have that information from your parent, that can sometimes feel like an added piece. The good news is we can do very thorough assessments. And so I thought that would be a great way to move into, you talked a little bit about, using a food journal. My bias has actually been to not have patients go do a food allergen or irritation intolerance testing right off the bat. Okay, good. So we're on the same page. So let's talk a little bit about why we don't do that and what your recommendation would be, because a lot of times we want to go into our practitioner and kind of understand what could be the best pathway forward to figuring out what we need to know about our digestion. So what do you recommend, and what have you found helpful and maybe not so helpful?
So I really like to start at the easiest way possible. First and foremost, I like people to get tested for celiac disease because I don't want to remove gluten from the diet until they've had, a negative test or a positive test, whatever it might be, but a definitive answer. Because if you haven't been tested for celiac and I take you off gluten and you feel better and you have celiac, you're going to have to go back on it to have that test done. And there is a gene test that you can do where they test 2 genes, but the gold standard is that endoscopy with biopsy. So that's first and foremost. From there, I like to have people be as liberal as possible with their eating. So I don't want to have too many things coming in at once. And with that, food sensitivity test you mentioned, I will say that from the research I've read and from research I've heard physicians speak on that do this work have said that those IgG tests, those are the antibodies they test for, may actually let you know what food you can tolerate with a challenge rather than something that you are intolerant to. So personally, as a dietitian, I like to work from, let's put that paper away that you got and let's just work from the low FODMAPs themselves. Because again, that food confusion comes in, then there's more food restriction. Food restriction can lead to exacerbating symptoms. So if we can just leave it with, let's follow nothing but the low FODMAP diet, unless you've been tested positive for an allergy, that's pretty much where I start.
I love it. I always say, because usually there's a panic attached to it. Oh my gosh, it's every food I normally eat. I was like, yep, you just spent $600 to understand that you have an irritated digestive system, which is why you came to us in the first place, right? So
exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears. And so we've talked about exclusion. I love your perspective on it's not about actually excluding all of this stuff. It's figuring out what are going to be the better combinations. So what are some of the things that for people with IBS are good nutrients for them to get in, as you were saying, to like get your gut in sync? So what should we be doing?
Get them all in, get all the nutrients in, right? So I really, what I like to see is people having a well-rounded diet, having food from every food group, no food group excluded, and really focusing on getting in, when they are on the low FODMAP diet, really paying attention to getting in fiber sources. That's a big part of keeping our gut healthy, whether you have IBS-D or IBS-C, so that's diarrhea or constipation. It's still important to have fiber in your diet. Why? One, because of the things we already know, that it does help with motility, it bulks up a stool, helps to reduce cholesterol, it does so many wonderful things for us. But it also is the main source of nutrients for the good guys, the good microbes in our gut. So I want to make sure that my clients are feeding those good microbes so that those bad guys who were, filling our bellies with gas are not as well fed, because they feed off of the high FODMAP food. So when we eat the low FODMAP food, I'd like it to be of good source of fiber specifically, so that we are feeding those microbes. So what does that look like? That looks like eating whole grains as often as possible. So the recommendation is to make half your grains whole. That would be a great start. So that would be things like, if you're following the low FODMAP diet, that might be things like quinoa, brown rice, foods made with cornmeal, right? Those are good solid grains. Oats are also low FODMAP at a certain amount. So that would be a good place to start. In the fruits and vegetable section, there are so many to choose from. Literally every vegetable that was normally in my salad got to remain in my salad. There are a couple that were in my regular eating pattern that I moved out, and you know what? Felt better, so I didn't miss them after a while. And same with fruits. So depending on where you live, at least where I am right now in rainy Connecticut, the summer stone fruits are not in season yet, and those tend to be the ones that are high in FODMAP. So if you are thinking that you have IBS and you want to try the low FODMAP diet, this is a great time to try it, because then you don't feel like you're missing out on summer fruit. And then during the reintroduction phase, you can try those and see how you do with them.
And that's so, and mentioning the reintroduction phase, I think is so important, that this is not, that FODMAP exclusion is not a, hey, let's go do this, and this is going to be the plan that you're on. So how long do you usually have people in the restricted phase before you get into the reinclusion? Yeah.
So the elimination phase is 2 to 6 weeks. The data shows that the diet works for 50 to 80% of people, and works better. They have a higher success rate when they've worked with registered dietitians. And I'm not being biased; it's in the data.
Right.
I will say that with my clients, I think out of the hundreds of people I've worked with, only 2 it didn't work for. So I think working with a dietitian, it really does help. It's a 2 to 6 week time, but I've seen clients feel better after 2 days, 48 hours. Usually when they do start to feel better, they are nervous to come off and go to the reintroduction phase, but I sort of always have to work that nuance of let's move to get more nutrients, everything that's on this is why I don't call the high FODMAP food list the bad foods. We have a lot in our culture of good foods, bad foods. These are safe during elimination and not safe during elimination. But elimination is so short that when you're not on elimination anymore, it's not going to matter as much, right? Because we will systematically add them back in, and then we will know specifically which are your triggers. So you might have removed all of these foods from your eating pattern for the elimination phase, but you may only have 1 or 2 food triggers after you go through the reintroduction phase, which will make life so much easier if you can pinpoint what those foods were.
What's the role of any dietary supplements? I mentioned before that, for one client, I identified the ones that she was consuming actually as problematic. But, are there supplements that actually help and maybe during each of these phases where you use them strategically?
So I'm not going to share specifics because I don't want people running away with, I'm going to go pick that up, because it really does depend on the person. But I will say that the use of prebiotics, prebiotic fiber is helpful. Specifically, one made with psyllium husk is a good choice. But I've also used digestive enzymes with my clients. One, I feel like it's almost like a safety net for them. They feel like it's this insurance that things will break down. It doesn't cause any harm in the body. If it's not working, it's not going to hurt you. So if people are finding that they say they have trouble digesting things, sometimes the digestive enzyme will help.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then in terms of, looking at your, the rationale for the FODMAP and for doing this, we had somebody who just straight up said, like, is FODMAP a weight loss diet? She's trying to lose weight. So you're immediately like, no. Okay. So let's
I'll explain that. So the low FODMAP diet is new to our mainstream culture, so it has yet to be co-opted by the diet industry. So there are many diets that were meant to be for health, and health does not equal weight, and weight does not equal health. There are plenty of people in bigger bodies that are healthy, plenty of people who are in smaller bodies that are not healthy, vice versa. So your body does not equal your health. So for instance, the keto diet. The keto diet was meant for children with epilepsy. It was never meant as a weight loss tool for adults. But when we run out of weight loss ideas, because that's what we do, we run out of them because they're not sustainable, they don't work. 88 to 95% of people who go on diets gain the weight back within 3 to 5 years. This is, known science. It's just not shared because the diet industry co-ops whatever they can and puts out a new diet every
I unfortunately jokingly refer to it as job security for dietitians, but I just say that as a joke. But yes, exactly.
But it's like constantly having to justify that no, that doesn't work, right? So I would encourage people to look more to eating intuitively, listening to their inner cues for hunger and fullness, and then becoming comfortable in the body that they're meant to be in, their natural weight, rather than trying to reach the thin ideal, because that striving to reach the thin ideal or restriction can lead to digestive issues. So to avoid getting digestive issues, stay off of weight loss diets.
And I think the only thing I love what you were saying. The only thing I'd add on it is the reason we're so focused on digestive health is you really can't have any health goal, whatever your goal is. If it's your skin, it's your energy. If your digestive system is not running better, if it doesn't feel better. So I think you could flip it and say, like, addressing for health reasons, as we were just talking about, addressing your digestion is absolutely essential, and that's to help you be healthy. And to your point, that's going to help your body get where it needs to be. Oh my gosh, I have like 5,000 other questions, things I could ask, but I'm going to remind everyone here, not only do you have Beth's website, but you also have her information for this amazing course to help your body get in sync. She also has over on her site a starter, maybe actually if you want to just describe that for a second so that I don't use the wrong terminology, but sort of test your IBS tell your IBS story.
Yeah. So I have a free template on my website called Tell Your IBS Story, and it's a place where you can include all of your health information, tests, doctor visits, everything, so that you can go see a doctor or a healthcare practitioner and get helped quickly for your symptoms, and so that you're not having the same test or same information given. So it's a great resource. You can download it and keep it with you. And as for my Get Your Gut in Sync course, that's soup to nuts, from how to get a diagnosis all the way through the low FODMAP diet to the alternative therapies, the supplements and prebiotics, probiotics piece, and then also some complementary therapies to deal with that stress management. Because yes, stress and worry does come up, right? There's a lower quality of life when you don't feel good. So that piece is included in there too. And I believe you included the link there, but I'm also offering $100 off the course to your viewers with the code BETTER at checkout. So use the code BETTER at checkout.
Yeah. So you guys share this, and especially, no matter what age someone is or who you're trying to help, definitely share this with other people so that we can all kind of find our way to better digestive health. And what's great about it is, I've had parents ask me this question, my kid's avoiding these foods or they feel like they don't work for them and that kind of thing. This may be actually what is at play there. And so, being able to assess that, and especially if you, as you were mentioning, on the genetic side, if you've battled these issues yourself, great to have the conversation with your kids about it. So, Beth, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. And we will, as I said, if you're watching us on YouTube and you liked what you saw, give us a thumbs up. And whether it's Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're catching this interview with Beth, we'd love it if you shared it with others so that they can get this awesome information too. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.